Vanessa had always been kind to Ryan, treating him with the grace of a friend, but as time passed, the air between them had become charged with an unspoken tension. It wasn't until one quiet evening, when Gregory was away on business, that Vanessa finally confessed a secret that had been haunting her for years. As Ryan sat on the couch, his mind consumed with the quiet hum of the house, Vanessa entered the room, her steps deliberate. She seemed more fragile than usual, her green eyes full of unspoken words. "Ryan," she began softly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Ryan's heart raced as he looked up at her, unsure of where this was heading. Vanessa's confession was not what he expected. She admitted that her feelings for him had shifted long ago, that the line between stepmother and son had blurred, and that she had been hiding her attraction to him for years. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of betrayal and longing. Ryan was stunned, unable to process the revelation. The once familiar room now felt suffocating, and every glance between them felt charged with the chaos of the secret they had just shared. As the days passed, Ryan tried to push the weight of Vanessa's confession from his mind, but it lingered like a shadow, following him everywhere he went. Each time he caught her gaze, the tension between them became impossible to ignore. One evening, after a long day of classes and work, Ryan found himself alone at the kitchen table, his thoughts racing. He couldn't help but wonder what Vanessa truly wanted, what this revelation meant for both of them. Just as he was about to bury his thoughts in a book, the familiar sound of footsteps echoed through the house. Vanessa entered, her presence as magnetic as ever. Without a word, she slid into the chair across from him, her eyes locking with his in a way that made his heart race. "We need to talk," she said softly, her voice trembling. Ryan felt his breath catch, unsure whether he was ready for another moment of honesty, another unraveling of their carefully built lives. Vanessa leaned forward, her hands resting lightly on the table, and without hesitation, confessed her desire to move past the guilt she had carried for so long. "I don't want to live in this silence anymore, Ryan," she whispered. The weight of her words pressed down on him, and for a moment, all Ryan could do was stare at her, unsure of the path ahead. The weeks that followed were heavy with an uncomfortable tension neither Ryan nor Vanessa could escape. Ryan tried to distance himself, diving into his schoolwork and part-time job, but every time he passed through the hallways of their home, his mind drifted to her. There was a silence between them, thick with unsaid words. But one evening, as the sunset bled across the living room, Vanessa broke that silence. She invited him for a walk in the garden, an invitation that felt like a subtle acknowledgement of the growing distance between them. As they walked through the blooming flowers, Vanessa's voice broke the stillness. "Ryan," she said quietly, her eyes tracing the horizon, "I don't regret what happened, but it was wrong. I know that now." Her words were filled with a sorrow that mirrored his own. The confession made his stomach twist. He couldn't deny the tension between them, but how could he reconcile his own feelings with the consequences of their actions? The warmth of the evening was now overshadowed by the realization that they had crossed an irreparable line. Vanessa's regret was palpable, but so was the undeniable connection between them. "What do we do now?" Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if afraid to say the wrong thing. As the days went on, Ryan couldn't shake the quiet ache that followed him wherever he went. He tried to distract himself, keeping his mind busy with work and school, but the images of the moments he shared with Vanessa lingered in the corners of his mind, always just beneath the surface. The house felt colder, quieter, an empty echo where once there was warmth. Vanessa, too, seemed to carry the weight of what had happened, her smiles now tinged with something deeper, something more hesitant. Neither of them spoke about it directly, but they both knew that the once shared comfort they had with each other was gone, replaced by a tension that neither could escape. One night, as Ryan sat in his room, trying to focus on his homework, he heard her soft knock at the door. Vanessa entered, her presence filling the space with an energy that made his heart race, though he had been trying to push it all away. She sat down beside him, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Ryan, I don't know how to make this right. I never meant for things to get so complicated." The words hung between them, a quiet confession of regret, and for the first time, Ryan didn't know how to respond. The silence that followed felt heavier than ever before. The days after that night grew harder, each one like a slow march toward an inevitable conclusion that neither Ryan nor Vanessa could bring themselves to face. The weight of the unspoken words between them seemed to grow heavier with every glance, every awkward silence. When Gregory came home, the house settled back into its routine, but the cracks that had formed in the foundation of their lives were too deep to ignore. Ryan couldn't help but notice the distance growing between them, even in the small things, how Vanessa's smile seemed more forced, how the evenings felt quieter, with the air always thick with tension. One night, as Ryan walked through the house, he found Vanessa sitting by the window, her eyes lost in thought, the dim light casting a soft glow over her features. He stood there for a moment, unsure of how to approach, how to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. "Vanessa," he began, his voice quiet but steady. She turned to look at him, her expression a mix of longing and sorrow. "What are we doing?" he asked, the question hanging in the air, a fragile thread of hope and fear. She met his gaze, but the words caught in her throat. Neither of them had the answers, but both knew that whatever came next, their lives had already been irrevocably changed. The nights became more suffocating as the tension between Ryan and Vanessa built, an invisible wall between them that neither of them could seem to break down. Gregory's presence in their home, though a welcome return to normalcy for some, felt like a constant reminder of the life they were desperately trying to hold together. Ryan watched as Vanessa wore her polite smiles and perfect posture, pretending everything was as it had been before, but the distance in her eyes betrayed the truth. She wasn't just avoiding him, she was avoiding herself. One evening, after dinner, when Gregory had gone to bed early, Ryan found Vanessa in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, her gaze distant. She hadn't noticed him at first, but when she did, her face softened with that sadness that Ryan couldn't seem to fix. "Vanessa," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, "we can't keep pretending. This," he motioned between them, "it's not just going to go away." She closed her eyes, a brief, painful silence stretching between them before she spoke, her voice heavy. "I know," she whispered. "But what are we supposed to do now? What happens when everything we knew falls apart?" Ryan didn't have an answer. The weight of their unspoken desires and regrets pressed down on them, suffocating the life that was left in their marriage. Ryan's mind spun in a constant cycle of self-doubt and guilt. Every time he passed Vanessa in the house, the unspoken tension between them seemed to grow stronger, more oppressive. He had started to notice the small things, the way she avoided his touch, the way her eyes wouldn't meet his, the way her laughter no longer reached her eyes. What had they become? Two strangers living in the same house, bound together by a fragile thread that neither seemed able to sever. The worst part was that he didn't know when it had happened, when their connection had frayed beyond repair. One afternoon, while Gregory was out running errands, Ryan found himself sitting across from Vanessa in the living room, the silence between them almost suffocating. He watched her, her fingers twisting nervously around the hem of her shirt, a habit she'd had since childhood. "Vanessa," he began, his voice tight, "we need to talk." She stiffened slightly but nodded, as if she already knew what was coming. "About what?" she asked, her tone unreadable. "About us," Ryan replied. "About what's been happening. I can't keep pretending I don't see it anymore. We're not living, Vanessa. We're just existing." Her breath caught, and she looked away, the guilt and sorrow in her eyes so palpable it almost broke him. "I don't know how to fix it," she whispered. And for the first time, neither of them had the answer. The heavy silence between Ryan and Vanessa was becoming unbearable. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating, like an unseen force neither of them could escape. Despite their best efforts to keep up appearances, they both knew something was terribly wrong. Every interaction, every word exchanged, felt like an attempt to patch a crack that had grown too large to conceal. Ryan found himself withdrawn, staring out the window during the quiet evenings when Vanessa cooked dinner, his mind replaying their past, the moments when they were happy, when everything felt right. But now, it was as if a wall had built itself between them, and neither knew how to break it down. One evening, as he absent-mindedly sipped his wine, Ryan noticed Vanessa standing by the doorway, watching him with an unreadable expression. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she hesitated. The weight of everything they had been avoiding seemed to loom over them both. Finally, she broke the silence. "Are you happy, Ryan?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, and Ryan felt his heart lurch in his chest. The question echoed in his mind long after the words left her lips. Was he happy? He couldn't remember anymore, and that uncertainty gnawed at him like a slow-burning fire. He met her gaze, the sadness in her eyes mirroring his own. The truth hung between them, but neither was ready to face it. Ryan's life had become a collection of half-lives, moments that felt more like echoes of a past he could no longer touch. The once comforting predictability of his routine was now a constant reminder of what he had lost. Every day felt like a slow march toward an inevitable confrontation, but Ryan had been avoiding it. Vanessa was no longer just the woman he loved. She had become a puzzle, a complex figure he couldn't quite figure out, no matter how hard he tried. There was a time when her laughter filled the house, when her touch had been a source of warmth and security. Now, her presence only amplified his isolation. The tension between them had been growing for months, maybe even longer, and he could feel it more acutely every time they sat across from each other at the dinner table, silently eating, both lost in their own thoughts. One night, after dinner, Vanessa turned to him. There was a flicker of emotion in her eyes, something between fear and determination. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Ryan's stomach dropped. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure he was ready to hear what she had to say. The cracks in their relationship were no longer just visible, they were bleeding into everything. The weight of Ryan's actions pressed on him as he lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. What had once been a life filled with love, laughter, and promise now felt like a haunting memory. He couldn't undo the decisions he had made, the moments he had allowed to slip through his fingers. Vanessa's words echoed in his mind, "This is dangerous, Ryan." She had been right. What they'd shared had become something far more than a fleeting connection. It had shifted into an emotional entanglement that threatened everything they had built. But the pull between them had been undeniable. As the days passed, Ryan felt himself spiraling. He tried to focus on his work, tried to bury the gnawing tension in his chest, but every glance from Vanessa, every moment of silence between them, deepened his inner turmoil. She was there in every space, in every thought, and yet they were miles apart. Ryan could no longer pretend that nothing had changed. The man he had once been, the person he had been with Vanessa, was gone. Now, there was only uncertainty. The promise of something new, of rediscovery, was both intoxicating and terrifying. Could he walk away from everything to pursue it? Would he be able to face the consequences of his choices? In life, we often find ourselves caught in moments of temptation and internal conflict, torn between what feels right in the moment and what we know is best for our long-term happiness and relationships. It's important to recognize when we are at a crossroads and take time to reflect before making impulsive decisions. Open, honest communication is key to maintaining trust and avoiding actions that can lead to regret. Remember that even in moments of temptation, it's okay to step back, reflect, and choose the path that aligns with your values, ensuring you protect the relationships that matter most.